curious, did you ever regret talking to a therapist psychiatrist? Why? Story 1, yeah. When I was in my late teens, this therapist suggested I should only think happy thoughts, that the abuse I received was my own fault for not standing up for myself. And when all of that didn't work, she prescribed a high dose of Xanax for me. Literally said she would be beating me out of her own daughter if she found out she was cutting herself like me back then. I thought this was the norm, and she was right. A better therapist later on told me that she was messed up and demanded the company she was with to make sure she wouldn't ever have another client again. Apparently, she got many complaints as she did this to many of her clients. Story 2, I did. I found it really difficult to talk about things, and it was emotionally draining. I'm a reserved kind of guy, and I don't talk about that kind of thing, so opening up was unnatural and too much to deal with for me. I also saw a Christian therapist, which in hindsight maybe wasn't the best idea for someone questioning their sexuality. Story 3, I've been seeing a therapist for a year, and it's been great. Some sessions are better than others, but it's helped me considerably with my issues of anxiety and depression. However, she suggested that I try one of the group classes, and I was hesitant, but I figured that the worst that could happen was a bad experience, and signed up for one. It went fine until the doctor-teacher asked to share what was bothering us. I was not at all prepared for this. It takes a long time for me to open up to someone other than a doctor about this stuff. I was not remotely okay with sharing this information with total strangers. I basically had an anxiety attack while waiting for my turn and did my best to hide it when I was asked to speak, but I wasn't able to form coherent sentences. The doctor reminded me to try some of the basic anxiety coping mechanisms, and I basically clammed up after that. I spent the rest of the class trying to not dwell on the fact that I had an anxiety attack right in front of people. I felt worse after that than I did before I started seeking help. It only really took me a week or so to feel normal again, but there's no way that I'll ever do any kind of group therapy again. Story 4 kind of, but not really. The time I went in my adult years, I had 2 issues, anxiety attacks when answering the phone in a new job, and no empathy. The anxiety was an easy fix, but the no empathy was caused by me being a sociopath, which I wasn't aware of. Most people feel optionally think, do see sick dog, feel sad, maybe think that dog is sad, it makes me sad, comfort dog, but I think optionally feel, do see sick dog, think that makes most people sad, comfort dog, carry on with day, unaffected. We did some sessions on identifying correct reactions, a lot of which I was already doing, which is supposedly impressive for someone without natural feeling, but mostly it just sucked to find out I was naturally broken and it can't really be cured. I have to manually care. My natural state is being in. It's good to know, but not particularly motivating knowledge. Story 5, yes, husband and I went to marriage counseling after a large marriage-altering event. He chose a Christian counselor. I had misgivings, but went anyway. Chick basically spent every session telling us to read some workbook she was selling, not even one she had written, and then ended in prayer. Yeah, not helpful at all. We ended up only going a handful of times and working things out on our own instead. Story 6, there was a time when I felt down a lot. So I figured seeing a therapist might be a smart move. She told me emotions are a triangle of happy, sad, and angry IRC. Whenever you feel sad or angry, just think about things that make you happy, that's it. That's all there is to it, apparently. Thanks, Doc. Story 7, I wouldn't say I ever regretted anything, but it took a lot of time and patience to find the right therapist. I don't really know how to explain it, but you just kind of have to find one that you click with. Story 8, not completely. I'm mostly convinced my therapist and I just weren't a good match, and that she was too mild for the size of my issues, combined with me not being able to explain the size of my issues very well. I came to therapy with one major problem, and through the process of her asking questions, she made it about something completely different. I wanted to talk about my problems, but she wanted to talk about completely other stuff, in this case, mostly my parents. Not denying it, my parents have been a problem factor for most of my life. So I don't blame her, because the stories I told about my parents were quite problematic, but I already knew that and had accepted that my parents weren't the reason I went to therapy. Now, since this was my first time having therapy, I kind of told myself that she knew what she was doing and that maybe my parents did play a bigger factor than I thought. However, nearing the end of therapy and afterwards, I didn't feel like anything was solved at all. Even if my main problem was my parents, it ended up in just accepting that they were, which I already knew my actual problem wasn't solved in any way, and it pretty much just ended up being a waste of time and money. The only useful thing I got out of it was general cognitive therapy strategies, which deal with generally figuring out where your actions and thought patterns originate from. Therefore, I don't completely regret it. And also because it taught me how to act next time I ever seek therapy, and that is to be very clear about what is bothering you and what it is you want to solve. I do want to stress that there is rarely a reason to not go to therapy, because I feel like this thread may be a derivative of that question. Therapy can definitely help a great deal. even if just for the sake of spilling your thoughts to someone. My mistake was that I kind of went along with whatever my therapist said or asked. You need to remember that you are the one this therapy is meant for, and you need to be the one walking out the door feeling at least the slightest bit lighter or more understood. The therapist's life isn't affected much. They will do whatever they think will help you. And if you agree too soon, they won't keep digging. It's necessary for you to do some actual prepping beforehand, to make clear for yourself what it is you want and need. Stay your ground. Don't quit until you get the results you want, and therapy could be a really, really great thing. Story 9 mixed. At first I had a bad one that kept making me relive a traumatic experience. That actually made me much worse. I switched to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where I didn't speak about specific things at all, just retrain my brain handle experiences differently. That was fantastic, best thing I could ever have done. Only took about 8 or 10 weeks appointments, and the results lasted forever. Story 10 yes and no. None of the therapists I've seen were a good fit for me. But in that process, I did figure out a few little insights that have helped over time. The first therapist was horrible. I had 2 sessions. I told them it was very important that my sessions are after 4 p.m., so I don't have to deal with telling work I'm seeing a therapist. The therapist said they would keep to that, then kept trying to schedule appointments at 2 p.m. and telling me my work should be okay with it. Yes and no, I wasn't in a place where I wanted to deal with any potential stigma, though. Then the therapist told me I was a vindictive and malicious person with anger issues because I expressed frustration about having to support my unemployed boyfriend who spent all day playing video games instead of applying for jobs. He did lay out 4 treatment plans, told me to pick one without telling me what they were. Then he told me I picked the wrong one and I should do a different one. I stopped seeing him after that. I gave the boyfriend a harsh talking to, told him to cut the bullshit and get a job because I wasn't going to stick around until he made us broke. He got a job and did very well at that company and has gone from being on the phones to a quality manager in 5 years. And is now my husband. We're doing great. My second therapist was a little better, but after about 5 sessions, he told me you sound depressed, and I can't help you if you're not going to do anything about that. I told him I was depressed, and I didn't know what to do about it because I didn't know why I was depressed when we started. He also claimed to specialize in treating depression and anxiety. He did try, I guess. He gave me a few articles about a few theories I didn't really agree with. I kind of felt like a project or a study with him, though. He was pretty young, only a few years out of university. I quit my latest therapist recently. I've been seeing her for about 6 months, every 3 weeks or so, about 10 sessions maybe. She was dead set on me pursuing a diagnosis for dyslexia, which to her credit has led me to pursuing a diagnosis for ADHD, which the GP and hospital think is possible. However, once I told her this, she kept trying to discourage that because she thought it was dyslexia. She was apparently dyslexic. Then she kept bringing up which essential oils I could use to treat it. She was big into essential oils as a hobby. You know, none of them except the first ever gave me any sort of treatment plan or anything to work on between sessions. So yeah, the journey helped a little. The therapists themselves didn't really help that much. I've instead found that prioritizing myself over my friends helps, and that I really need physical exercise to stay happy. When I don't work out, I get low moods that turn into depressive phases. When I exercise and eat right, I do much better, and I'm much happier. My friends aren't the best people, but they're not bad people, so I just have to tune my social engagements in a way to get the most out of them. Trying to hang out with them more to build better relationships had the opposite effect, because I would become resentful of the behaviors that annoyed me. Unfortunately, my town really sucks for meeting people between 25 and 60 unless you have children. There's almost no clubs or activities for people in that age range. You're either a student and can attend the university clubs, or you're a silver-haired go-getter who won't be tied down to an old people's home or whatever, or you've got kids you could take to clubs. It's frustrating. Story 11, yes, more or less every time I see her, to know if it's just my therapist or it's like this all the time. But she doesn't seem to understand the things she suggests don't work for me. She's also very antagonizing, and it feels like she blames me for the way I am as if I am bringing it on myself or something. This doesn't mean to say I regret opening up about my problems, because I find talking to my mom and my brother helps a lot. Story 12, she treated me like a product and did her job like it from a checklist. I wasn't in a good mental state at the time, and she pushed too many of my buttons. The most notable thing I said to her was stop regurgitating the same while you find off of the internet and do your job. Story 13, all of them have been lame. Worse ones tried to convince me I wasn't gay. Better ones still told me they couldn't really help me. Therapy is good, but there are a lot of shitty therapists out there, and I'm one of them. He said he was straight, but didn't mind me giving it to him in the... Story 14, yep. My therapist, who has been seeing for a year prior for other reasons, had incredibly unreasonable expectations for a new relationship of mine, talking about true love and how some people just get so lucky finding their person so young. I remember having misgivings at the time, but continued seeing her, started having relationship problems, so brought him with me to the therapist. Turns out it was the beginning stages of abuse on his part, but my therapist said nothing. Therapist started getting erratic and giving contradictory advice in the same session. Ended up having to dump the therapist before dumping the so. Ironically, this therapist is supposedly the best in my area for post-abuse counseling. Story 15, yup. She didn't understand what I told her and kept talking to me like was I a child. I mean, I was but a child back then, but she didn't change her approach after several failed sessions and didn't want to hear when I said that this method wasn't working. Neither would she listen to when my mom told her to change approach. So after roughly half a year, I stopped seeing her, and my 9-year-old self concluded that if someone whose job it is to help people with problems could not help me, then no one could, and after that I held every feeling back and hid my emotions because no one could help me, and I didn't want to appear weak. Story 16, yep. I told her I think I have PTSD because I have all the symptoms and suffer traumatic things. She said only people who end up in AE after being battered can have PTSD from abuse. She totally invalidated me, and I know it was ignorant. As the NHS website states, you can have CPTSD even for neglect, and I experienced a lot worse than just that. I just wanted to be evaluated, listened to, heard, but once again I wasn't, which was quite horrible to deal with. She was saying about how people try to find something to fit, a reason, and expressed, I seem to be seeking too much, searching for answers. I was searching for answers, but that's because I wasn't getting proper help, and I was struggling to function in normal life. Sleep terrors, emotional flashbacks, severe shame attacks, severe anxiety, dissociation, etc. Of course, I was looking for answers. I also got told that I couldn't get counseling there, which wasn't her fault, but the NHS fault for referring me to the wrong place. I wasn't currently being abused, and they wouldn't treat people who had escaped the abuse. That was hard because I'd been trying to get help for a while, and my hopes kept being squashed. She also handled it all badly by having me talk about the abuse I experienced, which got me into a really bad state. Then there being no closing down of that. I found it really hard to function in the following days and found myself needing to drink to calm my nerves to be around other people at work, only time I've ever drank at work. I know that's bad, but I didn't feel I had another option to not have a nervous breakdown. Overall, it was a terrible experience and nothing came of it anyway. I opened myself up to get shot down and told we can't help you. It's the invalidation and ignorance that was the worst, though. It made me lose a lot of hope and faith in the healthcare system. I can understand them being unable to help because of a referral mistake. Story 17, I went to see a therapist in my teens as I had developed an eating disorder. I made it very clear to her that I was okay with my appearance, quite happy with it. I wasn't still am naturally skinny and fit and loved my body too, loved food, enjoyed cooking. 3. The not being able to eat was likely stress-related due to the pressure of my studies, and I hated every minute of it. Because I missed food, she determined I was anorexic, hated the way I looked, and was choosing not to eat to punish myself. She would often comment on my looks and how I dressed. She then forced me to keep a food diary, even after I told her doing so was stressing me out even more. She never addressed the actual root of the problem or ever listened to what I had to say, and made me scared to ever seek therapy out again. Story 18, yes. I told him I wanted to hang myself once, and his response was, "That's interesting. That's a typically male way to die." He offered no help, just confused me talking about things that didn't apply to me after getting into an argument with my friend who was with me for support. Story 19, during my first year at uni, I developed severe social anxiety. In my second year, I went to a counselor at uni to try and get over it. I didn't obviously know what it was. I saw him every week for about 8 weeks. Always it would come back to my parents and my childhood, every time, no matter what we talked about. It was like he had one tool at his disposal and was determined to make it fit. Finally, out of the blue, he said, "You don't really want to be treated, so I can no longer help you." And that was it. Obviously, almost 20 years later, I'm completely on top of this now, that it's blown up into full-on avoidance. So, in a way, the problem took care of itself. Thanks, random uni counselor. Story 20, I don't regret having talked to a therapist or psychiatrist in principle. There's a very dismaying effect if you finally go to one, and it isn't the right one for you, though. So there are specific cases where I would have been better off not going and talking to the specific therapist or psychiatrist in question. But going to one in principle is a good idea. If you get the right one, your life can change dramatically for the better. Story 21, way late to this party, but yes, Growing up, my mother made me go to therapy. She drove me every Tuesday while I sat and talked about my feelings. This happened for 2 years. One day, she takes me to the therapist's office and runs in before me, saying she just needs to talk to her, and she takes my appointment. After that, now my mother and I have back-to-back appointments. After a while, I noticed my mother was referencing things I had told my therapist, private things, about how I was feeling regarding the relationship with my mother. This happened for another 2 years before I stopped going altogether. I was sick of everything I told anyone by proxy be told to my mother. Was sick of everyone trying to fix the fact that I just felt neglected and unloved and like I didn't have the guidance that I needed to get through a very difficult time in my life. I have gone back to therapy a couple of times since, but I can never really feel truly comfortable talking to someone like that again. There's so much betrayal that happened there. I'm still mending that almost 20 years later, my mom ended up going to the same therapist for about 10 years afterwards. She really stunted my mother's growth as a single mom as well, and it made everything more difficult. We're just now getting our footing. Story 22, yep. As a teen, I had a few sessions with a psychologist. I wanted to go in order to talk about some historical trauma, but my father was paying for the sessions because he wanted me to figure out how to better adapt to life with his new batshit crazy wife. After a few sessions, I found out that the psychologist was having regular discussions over the phone with my father and disclosing what I was saying during our sessions. I promptly freaked out and then refused to seek psychological help, which I really needed for close to a decade. Story 23, I went to see one for social anxiety and ended up being quizzed about my life. Within 10 minutes, she asked me, without prompting, if I was a virgin, and then just kind of recoiled when I said, well, that then became the new topic of conversation. Despite that not being the source of my anxiety or something I really care about that much, she was weirdly Freudian about it all, hypothesizing my lack of to be the source of my anxiety and asking repeatedly about my relationship with my mother. When I eventually navigated the conversation back to my anxiety in the abstract, she seemed kind of disinterested. I eventually just left without scheduling another meeting. 110 would not recommend. Story 24, I don't know if this counts, but I regret ever talking to my doctors about my anxiety, depression. Honestly, I don't think they understand how to deal with it very well. They either give you some shitty talk you've heard 1,000 times before online that changes nothing, or shove done soul-sucking pills into your hand. I've dealt with it better through friends. Nothing has helped me more than sitting down and having a drunk conversation with a friend who I consider a brother to me, and just spilling my heart out to him, and have him understand, and even relate to a lot of the problems I have. Professionals just don't feel genuine to me. It's like they've given this advice a million times before, and it just feels like it's automated advice at this point. They might as well just hand you a slip with all the info on it and say better. Story 25, yes. 1. I have been given ridiculous assignments and been subject to their latest theories about X-Fad. 1. I have been told my entire generation has been possessed because of satanic rituals performed on Cabbage Patch doll factories. 1. I have spent dozens of hours listening to shrinks try to prove how smart they are without getting any feedback from me. 1. I have been forced to sit for entire sessions, costing hundreds of dollars, being told to write whatever comes up in my subconscious mind, like, hello, you have a PhD, don't you even know what subconscious means? 1. Etc., etc., etc. Really, I've just felt like an excuse that people use to justify charging insurance companies or pad their egos, and not really like someone getting help. Story 26, I went to one about a year ago. At first it was promising. Of course, she told me to do sports. I'm a sportive guy, no problem, but she told me I should really start running. I hate running, it's so boring to me, but whatever. Did some other sports. At first she was listening to me and giving me advice, but honestly nothing new. I talk regularly with my best friend, and he gives equally good or better advice. Everything she told me was kind of obvious, stuff that everybody will tell you, but then I started to get the feeling that she was working against me. Longer story, my GF at that time started spending a lot of time with a guy friend. Okay, know what I'm worth, and am not jealous. Time passes, nothing happens. Because we were on the kinkier side, we tried a lot, and because she was my first to fear that I'm maybe missing out on something, whatever, I'm shy and just together with her, because she was my best friend and confessed her feelings for me. What I want to tell is I have a giant problem with getting to know girls and starting relationships. Something. One day my GF proposes the idea of a kind of open relationship. And not the convinced, but she tells me he'll find a girl to have fun with, and hopefully ITLL develop into a threesome. Okay then. Time passes, but I find no girl. Also because I'm anxious and don't want to. One evening she started a topic about polyamorous relationships and such, and I read an article she showed me. I get a bad feeling all of a sudden, and we talk, and she admits that she has feelings for someone. Punches in my stomach. I already know, you guessed right, the dude. Okay, did something happen? We kisses when we both were drunk some weeks ago, and she didn't tell me. I was sad, furious, and felt betrayed. I knew in this moment that she just pressured me into this to not feel bad about her feelings for the guy. Back to the therapist. I told her how I felt, and she says I'm wrong. I have no right to feel this way, and I'm childish. What? You am not telling you anything anymore. Had a couple sessions, but basically lied to her about stuff because I had the feeling she personally stacked me with what she said. Worked out with my GF after I took some LSD and opened up to her again. But at the beginning of the year, she broke up with me. Feel like at times and consider getting therapy again. But know for sure I'm not going to my old therapist. Was in and out of various forms of therapy for years with childhood issues. While most weren't regret, just not the right fit. There's some I look back on as potentially just as traumatizing as my actual issues. There was one therapist who insisted my disorder was just lack of willpower. This coming from a lady who was so fat she struggled to get out of her chair. Yeah, lady, you go ahead and preach willpower when you haven't had the willpower to stay fit. Not even fit, just mobile, was also obsessed with frog statues and sent me outside to count them while she had a chat with my mom about how hopeless it all was. Another was a psychiatrist, the only one I went to. She told my mom there was absolutely no hope of fixing me. None at all, no hope. So, as there was absolutely no way to fix me, I obviously had to keep going back to her. Literally, if anyone can explain what their logic was there, I would love to know. Also, ask me intimate, useless details about my life. Yes, Ms. Whatever, the solution to my deep-seated trauma lies in the cousins I've never spoken to, or perhaps the name of my grandparents' dog. I was super lucky that my mom remained hopeful that there was a solution and pulled me from any therapist that wouldn't work. I'm mostly better now for anyone who cares. Story 27, I told my first therapist that I have anger issues that I really need help working through because it's destroying my life. She just shook her head and goes, "Oh, I don't believe you have anger issues." I showed her a picture of the hole in my living room wall from where I put my fist through it. That was an accident, I'm sure. You're such a sweet girl. You could never have anger issues. I tried to talk to that same therapist about my abusive, controlling mother. She informed me that she could be my new mother. So anyway, after I unceremoniously fired her, I tried a new therapist. She really seemed to enjoy getting all the hot gossip about my awful mother, but had zero advice to give me. Well, that's not true. She did give me advice, once. I told her about my social anxiety-induced panic attacks every time I'm in an unfamiliar place, and she suggested that I go to a very crowded local amphitheater and just hang around and try to make friends with the strangers there. I don't see any therapists anymore. Story 28 Yeep. This once there was an ED psychiatrist whom, once she found out that I am engaged, asked me, don't you think your fiancé will get tired of you and leave you? Which has nothing at all to do with the current issue. What? Story 29, my therapist, told him I was lonely, and he said I can't be lonely because I was only 22. The second therapist I went and got but hurt because I said I felt more comfortable working with men than women in the workplace and wanted to argue about it. So yeah, I'm a bit hesitant to see someone now. Story 30, when I told him that I was worried people only hang out with me because I make jokes, he said, well, everyone has their role in a group. Great. They'll just keep trying to be funny all the time. And if I ever have an off day, everybody will leave. Thanks, Doc. Story 31, yes, I was honest with a new psychiatrist, and he sent a letter to my GP detailing every tiny thing that I'd said in confidence. Wasn't required, and now it's on file and can't be deleted because they need to keep records. I even went to the ombudsman to try and get it deleted, but no. Another time I was trying a new psychologist, and after the hour, she said I should find someone else, and charged me $60. Story 32, I had to see a child psychologist when I was 15 after a sway attempt. She was at best completely ineffective, and at worst emotionally abusive. She didn't believe I had any psych issues, and would just tell me how bad her other patients had it. She was also the first person to suggest I had BPD, which I do, and framed it as me being attention-seeking and not worth her time. I don't doubt that my attempt was a cry for help, and at the time I really thought that I was going to get help and get better once everything came out about my ED self-harm depression. But really I spent an hour a week with a woman who made me feel like a complete time waster and did nothing to treat my issues. Now I find it really hard to talk to psych professionals and have spent the last decade just trying to get healthy by myself. Story 33, I saw a few therapists through the mental health center at my university a few years ago, and I came to regret the whole experience. I really hate this outcome because it's made me feel reluctant to revisit therapy, even though I can imagine it being beneficial. The first time I saw a therapist for intake, he shuffled me into group therapy pretty much immediately. I had a hard time dealing with it because it felt very, very hard to practice behaviors, which is what we were meant to do, and even harder to open myself up to talk about my anxieties and experiences. The session leaders pretty much said group therapy was a failure for me. At the end of the term, they suggested I start over with another therapist. I did just that and saw the same therapist once a week for 5 weeks. I felt good about seeing him at first because he seemed to focus on concrete ideas I could recognize and pointed out specific action steps I could make to feel better. By weeks 4 and 5, however, the tone seemed to shift and he was being what I would otherwise call a devil's advocate with each example ID share or story ID tell. He'd take the other person's side, no matter how ridiculous, and eventually started acting personally wounded by the ways I responded to that. I felt more confused and isolated than ever, and he started talking about group therapy again. I expressed concern, but he insisted this process, minus the devil's advocate step, thankfully, repeated for about 6 months with 2 more therapists and 2 more near-immediate transitions to unsuccessful group therapy. The only thing I got out of it was feeling a bit better about being able to respond to peers and give advice perspective, but in the end I really felt attacked, abandoned, and even betrayed, and it will be hard for me to ever go to therapy again. Story 34 legit just brought up old memories that I had been suppressing. I don't care what people say about that stuff. If I don't remember it, it doesn't affect me. Story 35, I once told a doctor, not mental health specific, just a general doctor, I was depressed, and she told me that I wasn't. Years later, I was diagnosed with depression, but I will always remember her telling me I wasn't depressed and me bursting into tears. I told my counselor, I often hallucinate. I see bugs and I hear voices, but not all the time. And she took me out of our room and spoke to me and my mom in a public stairwell to say, I'm not schizophrenic because it's not continuous. Story 36, vulnerability is my big reason. I've never been good with confessing my issues, so when I saw the psychiatric nurse last month, I felt open and weak, which is apparently common amongst young men. I've still not attended an appointment with a psychiatrist because I'm afraid of admitting that I have a problem. If I talk about it, it then becomes an issue I have to deal with. My primary diagnosis was one of an ongoing 12-year struggle with depression and a self-defeating personality disorder with potentially undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia as a child. Story 37, attention. Serious tag notice jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit message compose, Tor AskReddit if you have any questions or concerns. Story 38, no. Only a volunteer school counselor. She told me I was difficult to work with because I didn't want to open up immediately. She told me that I didn't know what I was talking about when I suspected I had OCD. A psychiatrist later diagnosed me, when an actual therapist for my depression referred me. I wouldn't have even tried to talk about having OCD again if my therapist hadn't done that and told me I was making up for attention. I will say I was like 12 at the time and going through phases aesthetically. So I dressed like an emo kid and liked rock, stuff like that. This counselor on the first meeting found out I liked art. So everything that happened after was her asking me to express myself in a creative way. I appreciate that she went to the effort of bringing in craft supplies, but she didn't actually listen to me when I said I would prefer to just have the 45 minutes to talk it out and feel listened to. So one day, she is like, cut out things from the magazine that you feel relate to you. So I just start cutting out that seems interesting, and then I find the word in big letters and cut out because I liked music. Went on a rant about how I'm not because I don't have spiky green hair and blah blah. Like, excuse me, are you trying to gatekeep a 12-year-old style? Sure, at the age, I barely understood the full implications of things being labeled, but I sure as understood her shitty, I know more than you attitude. Like, you're the adult, I'm the child. If I don't know, that's to be expected. Don't try and prove someone that you're counseling that you're smarter than them. Crook misdiagnosed me with ADHD and tried to put me on pills as fast as he could. I thought I was just going to someone to talk to, but then I thought he's a pro, and I'm not. Better not question it. Took them once, had terrible mood swings and anger episodes. I just quit them and going to them altogether. Yet just recently I've been seeing a therapist and doing cognitive behavior therapy. This was because I tried committing suicide in early March 2018. She saw I was starting to get a little better, but the thoughts of committing suicide were still a part of me and occur regularly. She decided to end our sessions literally yesterday, as she saw a huge improvement. However, this is not the case. I regret seeing her, because she doesn't fully understand me, I reckon, and I still need the therapy. However, I don't really want to demand help again. It makes me feel really awkward, and I just can't. Story 39, as a child I did. Whenever they suggested my grandmother needed to be in therapy, as well she would request a new therapist Basically, anytime they said something she didn't agree with, I had to see a new therapist. There were a few I really felt comfortable talking to, but would end up having to see a different one instead. It was court-ordered for me to see one because of custody situation and the family dynamic.